Okay, well, it is 12:32. I think we're going to go ahead and get started here. So first off, thank you everybody for joining us for this panel discussion on environmental product declarations. My name is John McKenzie. I work for a company called Elucidate, and I help businesses navigate the local government market. I am joined today by Rob Conboy of Glavel, a company based in Burlington, Vermont that manufactures foam glass gravel. Jack Cove with Pathways. Pathways is a Boston-based company that helps efficiently process the data collection and EPD generation for material manufacturers. We're also joined by Jen Green with the City of Burlington. Jen is the Director of Sustainability and Workforce Development. And finally, we have Dave Roy from Wiemann Lamphere Architects. Dave is a principal. So with that brief introduction, I'd like to hand it off to maybe Rob to tell us a little bit more about yourself and Glavel, and then we'll go around and everybody can do a quick introduction.
Yeah, thank you, John. Appreciate the introduction. My name is Rob Conboy. I'm the founder and CEO of Glavel. We've been producing foam glass gravel, product that originated in Europe and has been manufactured for over 25 years. And we've been producing it here in Vermont since 2022.
Great. Jack, would you mind going ahead and introducing yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Jack Cove. I work on the go-to-market side at Pathways. We work with producers on making EPDs as easy as possible. And most notably, we're known for supporting Glavel and getting not only their first EPD, but the first foam glass gravel EPD in all of North America. So excited to be a part of the conversation.
That's great. Dave, why don't you go ahead?
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. David Roy with Wiemann Lamphere Architects. I'm a president principal here. We use EPDs to define a lot of the material selections we make for our projects, and Glavel happens to be one of them, and we were kind of an early adopter in their use, and proud to be so.
Jen?
Yep. Hi, everyone. I'm Jen Green. I'm the Director of Sustainability with the City of Burlington. I'm housed at the electric department. We have a municipal electric department here in Burlington, which is quite unique. And among other things, what makes us special is we are the first city in the country to source 100% of our electricity from renewables. So we really are pushing the envelope, and yeah, really appreciate being invited to this conversation. We're big fans of Glavel and Rob. I think our only complaint is that the manufacturing doesn't happen in Burlington, but that's okay. You're in Vermont, and that makes us proud.
Exactly.
Thanks for that.
Well, thank you all for joining. This is and thank you for having me to moderate. I really do appreciate the opportunity. So I'm going to go ahead and start asking some questions. I would like to note that anybody in the audience, if you do have questions, please go ahead and put those into the Q&A. You can type those in, and after we get through the panel discussion, we're planning to leave about 10 minutes to go through some of those questions and answer those the best we can. With that, I'd like to start by asking Jack a little bit of a high-level question about what is an EPD, and sort of give a high-level summary, if you can, high-level overview about what an EPD is and why a company might want to get one.
Yeah, absolutely. So EPDs stand for Environmental Product Declarations. Definitely a mouthful, but I think the easiest way to think about what an EPD is it's essentially a nutrition label for building materials. So the way you might go into a grocery store and flip to the back of a bag of chips and see how many calories and carbohydrates are associated with that bag, if you crush the whole thing, that's what an EPD provides for building materials. It tells an architect or a GC or a producer or really anyone what level of emissions is associated with the production of a product, whether it's something like Glavel or it's a cement or steel or wood product. They're becoming widely adopted across the building materials space to create transparency and visibility into what the actual underlying emissions factors are of these different products. Now, the reason someone might be interested in getting one, Rob might be more of an expert on that from the producer side, but what we see at Pathways helping a lot of producers go through this exercise is that the number one reason that they want to get an EPD is for market access. They actually want to have greater optionality on different projects that may be requiring EPDs because they have very sustainability or green forward initiatives and efforts. And EPDs help them get that access. On top of that, there's also the brand and narrative part of actually being a green, sustainability forward company and producer. So an EPD provides a very objective, transparent report on what your production is. And that obviously helps tell a story of how you are contributing to any sort of decarbonization or sustainability efforts down the value chain.
So Jack, when you're talking about climate and sustainability, there's obviously a lot that goes into that. There are a lot of different aspects and considerations. What specific aspects of climate and sustainability does the EPD address?
Yeah. So getting an EPD alone, if you just did it in a vacuum, that alone is not going to solve our climate crisis. But EPDs provide a data layer for decision making, informed decision making across the value chain. So I'm sure Dave is going to talk more about that, but he mentioned that they use EPDs when they are evaluating different building materials. GCs, owners, everyone is using EPDs to actually better understand what is the impact of one product versus another. If you go back to that analogy of groceries and nutrition labels, imagine if you went into a grocery store and you picked two things off the shelf and you're on a diet, but you actually can't see what one impact is or what the health is of one grocery item versus the other. EPDs are creating that transparency at the foundation of decarbonization and being used by everyone in the built environment to have more informed decision making when it comes to building materials.
I love the nutrition label analogy. It really makes it tangible. It's really easy to understand that way. I won't ever look at I'm buying my kids cereal. I'll be looking for their sustainability labels in the back now.
Be careful out there.
Okay, so actually, I have a question for Rob. I wanted to ask, as a company that just went through the EPD process, why? What was it about the EPD that made you want to go ahead and get that certification?
Yeah, so foam glass starts its life as recycled glass that gets ground down into a fine powder, and then we run it through a kiln, and it foams up into this aggregate. And it's a wonderful story to tell around the circularity of the product. And when we first discovered the product over in Europe, we realized that most of the manufacturing was being done burning fossil fuels. So we knew that we had to commit to doing things better than how they had been done before, and that was manifest in the electrification of our product and process. So in doing so, the result, thanks to our partners at Green Mountain Power, who supply us electricity with incredibly low embodied carbon electrons, that we had an opportunity to demonstrate an incredibly low embodied carbon material with a circularity story as well. But we couldn't just use EPDs that were being documented over in Europe. We really had to tell our own story, and doing it with a third party was critically important to that, and having a framework that customers and stakeholders could trust, knowing that it wasn't just us making these claims, it was actually diligently verified by a third party was critically important for us.
Interesting. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Jen, so the city of Burlington, how do low carbon, you mentioned, you're fully renewable energy, amazing. So how do low carbon building materials really factor into, say, a municipal climate plan or other climate related initiatives that you have?
Yeah, well, let me speak kind of more broadly about the sustainability field and what I'm hearing about from other sustainability directors and municipalities around the country. And these are groups including the Urban Sustainability Directors Network and climate mayors and these other groups that we're connected with. And I think there is, not too long ago, we were strictly talking about sustainability in this broad sense. And then the conversation turned to mitigation. So I've been really involved in sort of the mitigation work and reducing greenhouse gases. But as we see the effects of climate, the conversation is now including sort of resiliency. And so we have constituents really telling us we need to address all of these things. And it's obviously so true. So I think bio-based building materials, low embodied building materials, and various declarations that help builders, including sort of city staff, ascertain what's best in both the mitigation and resiliency and adaptation space is helpful and important. Our constituents are demanding it. And maybe I can leave it at that. Yeah, it's just important all around. We've got a lot of work to do. Cities are the front lines. And so we're looking sort of at all the tools in our toolbox, including things like environmentally benign products, better than things like Glavel, for example.
Right. So if as a city, you're doing a comprehensive approach to your sustainability and climate efforts, an EPD, using products that have an EPD just kind of makes sense, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I would say so. I mean, again, constituents are demanding that we do the right thing. And so we're thinking about the materials that we use in construction, in weatherization and beyond. And EPDs are theoretically an important part of that equation.
And I guess it almost speaks a little bit to what Rob was saying about having that third-party validation. It kind of works for you too in that sense, right? If you can say, yeah, we're using these products that have had a third-party validation to show your constituents that you are doing everything. That seems like it might be helpful too.
Right, because so much of this work is qualitative. And if we can show both quantitative and qualitative information about how we're doing the right thing, all the better.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Dave, I'd like to ask you, as an architect, how do environmental product declarations and really any other type of product declaration that you might come across, how do those factor into the work that you do?
Oh, he's on mute.
Sorry about that. I'll pick up on Jennifer's comments. Our clients come to us with sustainability goals in mind, and we help to educate them and help them understand ways to achieve their differing goals. Every project has different goals, but the EPDs helped us to facilitate the language and how we want to approach things, and understand what we can do to do that. In the case of Glavel, although not having the EPD certification yet, it's hyper local to our business. We're able to go out to the site. We actually did our kind of own due diligence. We've been to the manufacturing site, at least half of our staff have. We've all been out to the sites that we're installing it to understand, how the process works and what it's doing. Our goal initially for use of Glavel was to eliminate the use of fossil fuel-based insulation products. And we've been able to do that with their product, as well as like a timber HP product and other things. And that has helped us facilitate and meet our project goals, both for us internally and for our clients. So it's been very helpful.
Now, are there other declarations that you that you consider? Is EPD sort of part of a broader sort of scope of declarations that you might want to consider if you were going to be doing a project for a client that really wanted to have and be certain of the sustainability and the climate impact that project might have?
It's one of the certifications that we look at. We look at red list certifications as well, keeping products out of the stream of the building materials language that we're using, just to be environmentally sound and impactful. So there are different things that we look at. EPD is amongst the top tier of how we look at things, and the third party certification is great because it's not biased in any way. So,
okay, Jack, back to you. So, we're talking more about other certifications, and one that I think a lot of people are familiar with is LEED. And I know that EPDs, they can contribute some points under the LEED V5 and some other frameworks. And especially with there's a new focus in LEED on embodied carbon. Yeah. So how do you consider certification frameworks in an overall sustainability strategy?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think we often hear from producers that there's a little bit of frustration with moving goalposts or evolving demands when it comes to these different certifications. Dave just mentioned a few. We hear a lot about HPDs as well. There's a lot of different acronyms and buzzwords that show up in the embodied carbon. But the way we think about this is producers are often coming to us reflecting the needs of their customers, who are reflecting the demands of their customers. And these different certification frameworks are also a reflection of those same demands. So LEED, for example, LEED is obviously very important for everyone in the value chain. And the way it comes down to manufacturers is if you are able to contribute to a higher LEED score for your customer or your end customer, then your product is going to be more valuable to them. There's obviously a lot of other factors that go into it. But as LEED has increasingly attributed value to environmental product declarations, the value of EPDs has gone up for producers. So there's a part of, we see instances where producers have a specific job that they need an EPD for to bid on. And then in other cases, we see people getting EPDs so they can more broadly attack a target market that is really caring about EPDs. So LEED is I would say the leading framework that we see that's contributing to the different adoption of EPDs in different markets. But there is a long tail of smaller, more local policies that are also doing that in different markets.
Yeah, interesting. So I feel like I have a good sense maybe now of sort of why an EPD and general sense of what an EPD is and the importance of it. I want to ask Rob, what was it like to actually go and get one? What does that process look like from the producer, the manufacturer's perspective to go through and get one? What does that take?
Yeah, I think we are a little bit unique just because of the simplicity of our inputs. It's really just glass, sodium silicate, and glycerin that go into the manufacturing process. So we were fortunate to have a partner like Pathways to shepherd us through the process. And since our inception of the production plant, we have been keeping really diligent records in terms of who are we buying from, what are the quantities, all of the quality assurance documents that we have. So we had a treasure trove of data that Jack's team could draw upon and turn the EPD around. And I think it ended up being around 2 months. And again, giant asterisk on that because of the amount of data that we had for them to as a starting point, but also the simplicity of our process.
Yeah. So Jack, I think when we were chatting earlier, I think it was mentioned that Glavel did go through the EPD process very quickly. And I think, that's kind of what Pathways specializes in, is helping streamline that overall process. And so I'm curious, I kind of a two-part question, which is, what does an EPD process, or how long does an EPD process typically take for a company that maybe before Pathways was around, before Pathways was there? What would that process look like? What does it look like now? And then I guess it's actually a three-part question, because then I'd also like to know, Rob mentioned he had some data ready to go. So what types of things did they do and could maybe be replicated by other companies so that they could go through the process faster as well?
Yeah, I'm going to start with the last one, because I do think Glavel is a really good example of how to go about this. I think the simple, most qualitative thing that we see among people who do this really well is committing internally to this as a company level initiative. It's very easy to get overwhelmed by all these different certifications, or you hear horror stories about how long EPDs take or how long different sustainability efforts take. And I think sometimes people might drag their feet when they first are like, we're going to get started, but we're not going to really dig into this. The Glavel team was committed when we worked with them, and they obviously had really good data hygiene. They knew what was going to go into this. But I think having that internal commitment, being willing to upfront invest a little bit of your own time and energy is going to pay dividends in the overall timeline, and then also in making sure that you're going to get a really effective return on what that EPD is doing for your business. So I think that's the number one thing about what we see teams do well, knowing that many teams are going through this for the first time and it can be a bit foreign. In terms of timeline, years ago, I think for a lot of producers, it took upwards of 12 months to get this done. And there's been a lot of innovation in the space, not just by Pathways. There's a lot of cool companies out there that are solving what's mostly a data challenge and getting all of the operational data aggregated and clean to build a life cycle assessment to really estimate what the environmental performance is. So I now think, if producers are kicking this off, they should expect to find a partner that it's only going to take a couple of months. And sometimes, depending on that level of commitment and how much data they have, that could be 1 to 2 months. But I think anything beyond 3 to 4 months for your first EPD effort is likely longer than it should take. And hopefully that compressed timeline is going to get more people involved and more people interested in this, knowing that it doesn't always take a year or two to actually get this done.
Yeah, that's great, right? Because frankly, time is money. And if you're looking to see the return on the EPD, the quicker you have it in place, the better that return is going to end up being, just because you didn't spend nearly as much time going through the process of getting it in the first place.
Yeah. And I think one other thing I would add there, John, that we were chatting about last week is there's been an exponential growth in the level of EPDs. And that's a reflection of many things, but it is also a reflection of an improved process, both from LCA practitioners and software companies like us, improved knowledge and commitment from owners and operators like Rob, and improved processes from the program operators that do that verification. So I think across the board, everyone's getting better at this. And you can see that just based in the hundreds of thousands of EPDs that have now been published in North America.
Right. And the fact that people aren't having to wait as long to get them just shows that, there's more coming and they're going through faster, even better. Yeah,
exactly.
So, Pathways, you don't issue the EPD. You sort of shepherd your clients through the process. Is that right?
Yeah, so we consider ourselves an end-to-end EPD solution, and we are ultimately the group that's responsible for getting the EPD published. But when it is published, it falls under the ownership of the producer. The key player in this is something we've alluded to a couple of times, which is a group or a authority called the program operator, and they're the groups that actually do that verification. This is super important in the process of EPDs. We all are very familiar with the risks and concerns around greenwashing, and program operators play a huge part in making sure that EPDs remain that credible, transparent documentation of what the emissions footprint is of a product. So we ultimately do all of the data modeling, the data collection. We estimate and build a model that shows what the carbon footprint is, and then we submit that for verification to a program operator. These are groups like ASTM, NSF, NRMCA in the concrete space. And these groups are really important in making sure that once we hand that over to Rob and Tor and everyone at Glavel, when they go to their customers, everyone knows that that's not some unverified claim that they just spun up. It is backed in data, and they have the evidence to show that number is real.
And just so I caught one of those acronyms, the NSF, I'm assuming that's the National Science Foundation. Am I right?
Yes.
And I would guess that the others are similar groups in that they're sort of independent associations that do things like certifications. That's their business, is to be independent and to certify so that trust is built in.
Exactly. And
yeah,
I get too deep in the acronyms. I apologize.
No worries. Everybody lives in their own acronym world, whichever sort of market niche they're in,
I'm like, NSF? You're telling me everyone doesn't know NSF?
I know, that's the one I got. Anyway, so, okay, Dave, I wanted to go back to you and just ask, because you've actually worked with these products in practice. And so can you share some examples specifically of where you've used them and how that's led to some sort of measurable, tangible outcomes for your clients?
Did it again. Absolutely. We've done a number of projects over the last couple of years. Like I said, we were looking for a product to replace oil-based insulations. When Glavel came along and introduced their product to us, we understood that there's a option here, a really viable option to replace all that underslab insulation with something that's, I'm going to call it natural. It's recycled material made through a great manufacturing process that's electrically based. And our utilities happen to have a very green approach to energy demand. So all those factors were intriguing. It's a lightweight product to manufacture, not to manufacture, but to transport. And it's hyper local for us. So we're able to go to the factory, kick the tires on the product, so to speak. We've been out to the site. We've done projects anywhere from, I'm going to say 10,000 square feet up to 70,000 square feet of footprint of Glavel. And we've been working pretty closely with the Glavel team on developing the compaction method and how to approach the real installation procedures, which will maximize the efficiency of the product over the life of the building. So we feel real comfortable that we've worked out any kinks on how to apply it. The site subcontractors are more prolific in using it. They're not as uncomfortable about it because it's a relatively new material. And that's been helpful for us to both specify and continue to use it on a regular basis. And when we did the first analysis, it was really, I mean, oil prices were higher. So we were actually at a point where we were creating the right solution for the building, both a long-term solution, a recycled product, at a better value than the actual insulation itself. So it made absolute sense to go this direction. So it was kind of a win-win-win for our clients, us, and Glavel. But we've had great success in doing so.
Yeah, I mean, it's great to hear a situation where you were able to put in place a sustainable, low embodied carbon solution for a client that also is cheaper, right? Because that's not something you hear all the time. Sometimes, you know, the reality is sometimes that costs more. So it's great that sometimes EPDs don't necessarily translate to more money. Using a product with an EPD could actually be cost effective. Very good to know. So, Rob, are there any city projects or any local government projects where EPDs have been used and resulted in measurable impacts that you're aware of? And maybe Jen could answer that one too. I don't know.
Yeah, from a city level, it really is in the sort of nascent stage of awareness around EPDs and how to lever them from what we've seen. In Colorado, you've got the Buy Clean movement and legislation around focusing on low embodied carbon building materials. That's part of their goals around carbon, not just in terms of the emissions, but also in terms of the materials that are being used in municipal buildings in Colorado. So I would say they're at the forefront, but you are seeing that proliferate all over the United States. Massachusetts has some language that's bubbling up, and the town of Ithaca also has goals around the materials that are being used for their project. So Jack sort of mentioned that we are on that kind of hockey stick of awareness and the amount of EPDs that are out there now, and that wonderful moment where the desire to do the right thing is being met with all of the tools to make sure that it is quantifiable and they can deliver on the promise or the goals that they have. So I think we really are at a critical inflection point where we're going to see more and more of driving towards these kinds of materials as municipalities have commitments to their constituents.
Yeah, it makes, it's good to know that there is some action already in progress in Colorado, because that can be a great place to start looking, right? If you're a city in Massachusetts or Vermont or Connecticut or wherever, you can look at your peers in Colorado and know that, hey, there's some actual language on the books here about how do you bring EPDs into your overall climate strategy. So what kind of doors did getting this EPD open for you from a business perspective, Rob? Is this something that, obviously there was motivation to get it for a lot of reasons, but one of them is, hey, it opens doors business wise. So can you tell me a little more about that?
Yeah, I would say there was a segment of the market that were waiting for us to have our EPD. Architects or customer base that wanted that certification. So it was great to go back to them and make good on the promise that we actually have this third-party verification. We've also seen it manifest. We sort of talked a little bit about LEED and the LEED points associated with a carbon strategy. And with LEED 5 expanding into the hardscape, that now you've got landscape architects that are looking to help contribute and meet carbon goals, and EPDs allow them to realize, are there other materials that they can substitute to help meet their carbon goals? So we're seeing a broadening of application for our product beyond just, as David mentioned, as an insulator and replacing the petroleum-based foam product underneath the building to insulate, broadening into other applications that folks may not have been aware otherwise. So the EPD becomes that trigger or that spark for people to see where they might be able to transition into a product with a lower embodied carbon, as opposed to what they might have first thought they might want to use. And then just the ability to tell the story and be part of that movement. I kind of mentioned the hockey stick. This is the future. Using low embodied carbon building materials is critically important. As David mentioned, we just happen to be a solution that doesn't come with a green premium, but other EPDs and producers, we hope will be in that same kind of position to kind of break down those predispositions that green products are more expensive. So we can be at the forefront telling that story as well.
So, Jen, I wanted to go back to you here for a question. And I know.
I think John just broke up. That's all right. I mean, I'm happy. Well,
can you hear me now?
Yep. Have at it.
Okay. I was going to ask about the sort of culture of collaboration within local governments and how that factors into your work at the city and discussions of things like EPDs and overall sustainability initiatives, and how you work together as a community of local governments to share ideas and best practices.
Yeah, thanks for that question, John. I love talking about my job and how I connect with other sustainability directors around the country. I want to just piggyback on Rob and this. I think among the field, among my colleagues, there's this increasing recognition. For my first years in this business, in this sector, we talked a lot about building operations and mitigation once the building was built. And we're hearing more and more now about how do we build the best buildings possible. So embodied carbon and what's going into the buildings. And so when I'm talking to my colleagues in the Urban Sustainability Directors Network or the New England Municipal Sustainability Network, or with climate mayors, all of these groups, I mean, this is a topic of conversation that comes up more and more. So I think to answer your question, we're really sort of in cahoots, talking together, sharing best practices, and I think embodied building materials that have less embodied carbon, bio-based building materials, all these things are really much more a topic of conversation than they were arguably even 5-6 years ago. So we're really in an exciting space where we're thinking sort of, holistically about obviously our cities and then about the built environment more specifically. And yeah, it's an exciting time to be thinking about building materials.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense as cities are thinking more holistically about how they tackle climate change and how they implement their climate plans, that EPDs would make be a big factor in that, since their whole thing is comprehensiveness, right? It's measuring the life cycle of the embodied carbon within those manufactured products. That wraps up all of the prepared questions, the things we've been thinking about beforehand that we wanted to discuss. I think several questions did come in through the Q&A. Tor, would you mind reading some of those? I'm having, I know that my internet is having a little bit of challenges right now. And you're on mute. Actually, I've got one here that I've got up. And so I am going to go ahead and ask this and say, what is the typical scope for an EPD, and what portions of a product life cycle does it cover? I think that'll probably go to Jack, and of course, anybody else can jump in with information they have too.
Yeah, absolutely. So great question, and going to use a couple more acronyms here. So we didn't talk too much about the relationship between a life cycle assessment, an LCA, and an environmental products declaration. The life cycle assessment is essentially the model that sits under the environmental product declaration. That's that model that I mentioned gets submitted for verification. And what gets included in the life cycle assessment, both in terms of is end of life included, where do we start, what assumptions are relevant, is actually determined by what we call product category rules, PCRs. And those are essentially the recipes for certain categories of products that define what should go in, what should be included for that ultimate model. So for every product, it's different. There are certain products that are cradle to gate, meaning the impact once it leaves the facility to go to the actual site is not included. And there are other products that are cradle to grave. And that obviously means it's all the way through the end of life. So it does vary significantly by product and product category, but there are clear guidelines and rules for most products that exist.
So another question, and this one is for David and Jennifer, and that's, how do you use EPDs, and what role do they play in explaining or demonstrating to building owners, occupants, or constituents the tangible benefits of the product choices being made based upon EPDs? And there's a second part to that question, which is, at a time when Congress has proposed rescinding provisions of the IRA, and in the case of the mayor of Washington, D.C., proposing pausing funding for programs to require improved building performance, we need to demonstrate the tangible and long-term benefits. And that was directed to David and Jennifer, but I think, again, we can open that up to the panel for answers and discussion.
So I think the important thing is just demonstrating the tangible benefit. In the case of the Glavel, I think I alluded to that earlier, is there was a benefit regardless of the financial implications of it. The other aspect is having a client who's willing to do the right thing and buy from a producer. I take Interface Carpeting as an example. They have a net positive manufacturing process. They also look at end of life, and that's a product that turns around periodically from time to time. So it's replaced, and there's consideration for recycling, replacement, maintenance, all those things that have to go into the product selection. The EPDs help us evaluate the net benefit to the project in terms of carbon usage. So in the case of Glavel, it's pretty easy, because once we put it under the slab, you're not doing a lot with it. So it's doing its job underneath. There's not a replacement issue. Some other products are a little bit more complicated, and we have to look more in depth at them. But I don't think it's a funding issue. It's all about what the client's desires are in terms of their goals for sustainability, and how the EPD helps us evaluate what that benchmark is for achieving those goals, and that's what we use. So
Yeah, and I would just, beyond sort of city projects, and I think Rob can talk more about this, but I think sort of our role and the role of my colleagues in the sustainability field is to celebrate those private sector folks that are doing the right thing. So this is, we often serve as cheerleaders in our public-private partnerships. When we do see private sector folks doing, thinking about their building materials, this is when we might put out a joint press release, for example, just to celebrate their work. So that's part of the role of city government. I don't know how specifically that answers the question, but sort of piggybacking on Dave and David's clients that are sort of doing the right thing. And my role as a city staff person in sustainability is to help ensure that those folks get the credit they deserve for sort of moving the needle and being innovative with new product.
Yeah, and I would say just in terms of the IRA itself, it had taken a really long time for that part of the IRA to take effect, and that funding hadn't been distributed yet, but it really didn't diminish the awareness and the demand for low embodied carbon materials. For us, again, there isn't a green premium, so we weren't reliant upon subsidies to help increase our sales, but rather it was just an awareness thing. So we really hadn't experienced a dip. Yes, it would have been very exciting to have that be part of the federal government supporting low embodied carbon building materials in low income housing and infrastructure and GSA buildings. But with the delay or elimination of that program, it really hasn't affected, from what we can see, the demand and the awareness of low embodied carbon building materials.
Something of a follow-up question here is, when I think to places I've been that are LEED certified, and I walk in the building and there's a plaque or something that tells you, hey, LEED silver, gold, platinum. When it comes to EPDs, is there a way for, say, if it were a city, their constituents to know, hey, our city building used some percentage of products that had an EPD? Is there any sort of public facing showcase that these products were used, or is it on the city itself to, say, do a joint press release or something like that? I don't know who that question's directed to. Probably Jack, but I'm not certain.
I don't think so. I don't know for sure, though. I think it's a really good question. I mean, a perspective that I have personally, and I would think is true for most of the team at Pathways, is like we believe there's going to be increased demand at the individual and consumer level for things like EPDs. I think we're not too distant from a world where when you go shopping at Target or you go buy a new chair, something that's much more at a micro level relative to commercial buildings, people are going to be making decisions based on what is the carbon associated with this product. So I hope and I expect that something like that comes to fruition. Maybe that's something you can bring to market, John. I have not seen it before, but I think it's something that we obviously very much encourage, and it's one of the many things that's going to take some collaboration across different players in the value chain to take what is sometimes seen as a relatively technical concept and make it very digestible, so people can understand what they're looking at, what decisions they're making, and have that visibility into things that right now almost feel gatekept to certain people in the market.
Yeah. I'm going to just build on that. A lot of our clients are able to evaluate their energy savings based on new systems that we might put in. It's very calculable. It's very relatable to many people in the public realm. When we get into EPDs, it's a little less tangible, I guess, so to speak. We can talk about the materials that we're using and how we might be using them and the idea behind them. But it's a little bit harder to quantify any net savings. Savings is the wrong word, but it's hard to define what the calculable carbon offset might be for that product or whatever. So an interesting thing to think about. It would certainly require the input of the contractor, the owner, the architect, everybody to put that together and document it and present it in a meaningful way.
Yeah, and there's definitely a desire to do that. You know, there are evangelists out there who want to tell their carbon story. So folks like On Logic did a wonderful job and have videos on YouTube talking about their commitment to their manufacturing and office space that we were lucky enough to be a part of. I was on a tour of university in Oregon with my 18-year-old, and you know, there's this natural storytelling effect. You know, they're obviously a tour, they want kids to go to that school, but they were really proud of the commitment around low embodied carbon building materials being utilized in their buildings. And schools like Dartmouth have commitments around carbon and the materials that they're going to be using. So I think that storytelling effect is palpable when it comes to the materials that folks are choosing to use in their projects.
I just want to piggyback on Jack. I think the time is coming. I mean, we offer rebates and incentives on equipment. Think heat pump, think EV. You know, that's all about the electricity use. And a day will come when we're offering, I don't want to get ahead of myself. In my vision, the day will come when we'll be offering rebate and incentives based on GHGs. And that will be a game changer. But in the meantime, I'm heartened by how much conversation there is. You know, just a couple of weeks ago, we had a bio-based materials collective summit here in Burlington with folks from around the country gathering to talk about sort of local materials, low embodied carbon construction. So we're not talking about end of use, we're talking about what goes into buildings. And it was exciting to be a part of that and to see sort of, you know, begin to sort of ride this wave and see this talk happening, I think, in offices like mine around the country.
And as you were discussing just, you know, a bit ago, Jen, that with that culture of collaboration that you see, I think we could expect it to grow, right? You'll expect to see more of these because you'll have folks getting together and talking about the value of these of EPDs and the value of bringing those into your formal plans of how you're going to build and use materials as you develop. I don't know, are there any more questions from the audience? Even internally, I guess panelists could ask each other questions if we'd like, but we may be at the end of our questions. So if there's any more people would like to ask, please do so. Anything else coming in? Let's see. I think so. And if not, that is perfectly fine. I thought this was a great discussion. Nobody gets upset for a webinar ending 10 minutes early. So if anything, I think we're doing great here. But I do know that this is being recorded. So this, I think a copy will be sent to those folks who have attended. I think we got a question. Oh, no, it's just a compliment. So thank you, Kevin. We appreciate that. So the recording, I think, will be sent to everybody who is able to make this webinar, as well as those who register but were not able to make it. And I have a feeling this may show up on a website somewhere where people can revisit it at any point. But thank you all for attending. Thank you very much for the panelists for joining the discussion. I really enjoyed my time moderating this, so thank you for having me. And I think that may be it.
Thank you, John.
Great.
Thank
Thank
you all.
you.
Everyone.
All right,
Bye
take
now.
care.
Take
All
care.
the best.
Bye-bye.
Bye.